Imagine a world where ailments were treated with natural remedies, where surgeries were performed without modern tools, and where health was seen not just as a physical condition, but as a balance between body, spirit, and the universe. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a civilization where medicine was sacred, mystical, and surprisingly advanced. Let's go back more than 4,000 years to the banks of the Nile River, where temples rose from the earth, prayers echoed across stone walls, and healers studied the patterns of illness and health with deep focus and devotion. This is the beginning of a powerful story, the lost secrets of ancient Egyptian medicine. The Nile River was the heart of Egypt. It nourished the land, guided the calendar, and brought the people life. But it also provided something deeper: rhythm. And from that rhythm, the Egyptians learned to observe the cycles of health, birth, death, and disease. The Egyptians were not just believers. They were observers. When someone fell ill, they looked for signs. When wounds healed, they took note. They built a system of medicine not by theory, but by trial, observation, and sacred tradition. At the center of this system was a single word: Ma'at. Ma'at was the principle of balance. It meant harmony, truth, and order. To live in Ma'at was to live in health. To fall out of Ma'at was to suffer disease, emotional disturbance, or even misfortune. Doctors in ancient Egypt didn't just treat symptoms. They aimed to restore balance. They believed illness came not only from the body but from the spirit. A broken bone could be real, but it might also reflect broken order in one's life. A fever could be the result of infection, or an imbalance of divine energy. Medicine was both practical and spiritual. A healer might apply honey to a wound, then recite a sacred spell over the bandage. A woman with trouble conceiving might receive a herbal potion, but also an amulet blessed by the goddess Isis. This dual approach, using both the physical and the mystical, formed the heart of Egyptian healing. And unlike modern medicine, which separates science and belief, the Egyptians embraced both fully and without conflict. Their tools were simple, but their insights were deep. They learned much about the human body from mummification. Although dissection was not allowed for religious reasons, embalmers who prepared the dead gained practical knowledge about anatomy. Over time, this knowledge passed from embalmers to physicians. They recognized organs: the liver, the heart, the lungs, the stomach. They did not fully understand the brain and often removed it during embalming. But they carefully preserved the heart, believing it was the seat of emotion and intelligence. Their understanding was based on centuries of hands-on work, observation, and documentation. They knew how to set bones, how to stitch wounds, how to reduce swelling, and how to treat infections with mixtures of herbs, honey, and oils. Their knowledge was far ahead of its time. And the place where this knowledge was passed down was sacred too. Egypt's first medical schools were called the Per Ankh, the House of Life. These temple schools were part library, part hospital, part spiritual center. Only a few were allowed to study there, often from priestly families. Students at the Per Ankh were trained in both healing and writing. They copied down the medical scrolls, memorized diagnoses, and studied hundreds of natural remedies. They were taught to treat with skill, and with reverence for the divine. This was not ordinary medicine. It was a spiritual calling. And the doctors who practiced it were more than just professionals. They were part of the sacred order that protected the balance of the world. The doctors of ancient Egypt were called swnw. They were highly respected members of society, trained in both physical treatments and spiritual rituals. Some served in royal courts, tending to the pharaoh himself. Others walked among villagers, offering care to the common people. These doctors did not work alone. They were part of a team. There were scribes who recorded symptoms and outcomes, priests who offered spiritual protection, and herbalists who prepared potions and remedies. Each played a role in the healing process. Some doctors even specialized. There were eye doctors, dentists, stomach specialists, and experts in wounds or childbirth. One ancient title even translates to shepherd of the anus, showing just how far their specializations went. Their medical kits were simple but effective. They carried knives, forceps, spoons, bandages, and ointments. They examined their patients using sight, smell, touch, and even taste. They checked the pulse, looked at the eyes and skin, smelled the breath, and listened to the patient's complaints. Diagnosis was based on careful observation. And once the problem was identified, the treatment could begin. Much of what we know about Egyptian medicine comes from their medical papyri. These ancient scrolls were handwritten on papyrus paper and stored in temple libraries. They were copied from generation to generation, preserving hundreds of years of medical knowledge. One of the most famous is the Ebers Papyrus. This enormous scroll is over 20 meters long and includes more than 700 medical prescriptions. It covers everything from headaches and stomach pain to skin diseases, burns, and even mental disturbances. The remedies it describes are often a mix of practical ingredients and ritual words. A treatment might include garlic, honey, fig paste, and crushed minerals. But it might also include a recited spell to drive out the cause of the illness, believed to be a spirit or imbalance. Another remarkable text is the Edwin Smith Papyrus. It focuses entirely on trauma, broken bones, head injuries, and wounds. What makes this papyrus unique is that it uses logic and observation. It describes the injury, offers a diagnosis, and suggests a treatment. Some entries end with the doctor's decision: an ailment I will treat, an ailment I will contend with, or an ailment not to be treated. This shows an early understanding of medical ethics and triage. Egyptian doctors knew their limits and sometimes accepted that not every case could be cured. There's also the Kahan Papyrus, which deals specifically with women's health. It contains gynecological information, fertility treatments, and even early forms of pregnancy tests. One test involved urinating on wheat and barley seeds. If one type of seed sprouted first, it indicated the gender of the child. Modern science suggests this test might actually detect pregnancy hormones. These papyri were more than collections of remedies. They were manuals of practice, passed down carefully through generations. They reveal a system of medicine that valued structure, discipline, and the wisdom of those who came before. And behind all of this was a concept that connected everything together: the theory of meta. The meta were believed to be internal channels within the body. They carried air, blood, water, and energy. The heart was considered the center of these channels. The Egyptians did not fully understand the nervous system, but they knew the heart was vital. They believed it controlled movement, speech, and even thought. If the meta were blocked, sickness occurred. Treatments were aimed at unblocking these channels, using purgatives, massages, hot compresses, and sometimes magic rituals. This idea may sound strange, but it echoes similar concepts in Chinese and Indian medicine, where health depends on the free flow of life energy. The Egyptians saw the body as a network. Every part was connected. Every symptom had meaning. Healing was about restoring the whole. While the Egyptians believed deeply in divine influence, they were far from relying solely on prayers. They developed a strong tradition of diagnosing illness based on physical signs. Their approach, though mixed with ritual, was practical and remarkably systematic. Doctors would observe the patient carefully. They watched the color of the eyes and skin, listened to the breathing, examined wounds, and even smelled the breath and body. In some cases, they tasted the patient's urine to detect unusual sweetness, perhaps an early awareness of diabetes. They also monitored the pulse. The link between pulse and heartbeat was recognized, even though the function of the heart was misunderstood. To the Egyptians, the heart was not just an organ. It was the seat of emotion, intelligence, and identity. The brain, on the other hand, was considered less important, often discarded during mummification. Diagnosis was a skill built from experience. The doctors recorded their cases and learned from them. They used structured formats in the papyri: observation, assessment, and recommended treatment. And in cases where no treatment was known, they simply wrote, "This is an illness not to be treated." This honesty, this humility, was rare in ancient medicine. Many cultures claimed to have cures for everything. But the Egyptians acknowledged their limits and used that knowledge to educate the next generation. Another striking feature of Egyptian medicine was its specialization. Different doctors were trained for different areas of the body. Some were experts in the eyes. Others focused on the belly or the teeth or the reproductive system. In royal courts and temples, these specialists held titles and ranks. They may not have had modern degrees, but they worked under a structured system, supported by religious institutions and medical schools. Some doctors even supervised others or held titles like chief physician or inspector of healers. One remarkable figure in medical history is Peshet, a woman believed to have lived around 2400 BCE. She held the title Lady Overseer of the Female Physicians, showing that women not only received care but also practiced medicine themselves. She likely led a group of midwives and doctors who specialized in women's health and childbirth. Midwifery, in fact, was a respected and critical role. Birth in ancient Egypt was a sacred event, tied to the blessings of the goddess Hathor. Midwives used natural aids, herbs, oils, massage, to ease pain and support the mother. They also used charms and amulets for protection during delivery. It's also worth noting how clean their practices were, especially compared to other ancient cultures. They used boiled bandages, sterilizing agents like honey and beer, and changed dressings regularly. Honey wasn't just a sweetener, it was a powerful antibiotic. We now know it contains hydrogen peroxide, which kills bacteria and helps wounds heal. Doctors also used copper tools, which have natural antimicrobial properties. Their tools were cleaned in oils, alcohols, or antiseptic herbs. Their bandages were made from linen, sometimes soaked in medicinal compounds before being applied to wounds. Even without microscopes, they understood the importance of cleanliness. Their temples and houses of life were kept orderly, and their patients were often bathed before treatment began. Healing rituals were performed in clean, quiet spaces, often with incense burning and candles lit. This wasn't just about atmosphere. It helped purify the air, reduce stress, and create a sense of spiritual peace. The Egyptians also believed in preventative care. Patients were advised to eat certain foods, avoid certain behaviors, and wear amulets to protect against unseen forces. Some of these suggestions sound strange today, but others remain surprisingly relevant. They believed in the healing power of garlic and onions, which modern science confirms have antibiotic and immune-boosting properties. They used dates, figs, and flaxseed in their diets, all known for digestive health. They brewed herbal teas to soothe coughs and aid sleep. Their medicine was a mixture of food, herb, and faith. Their hospitals were temples. Their doctors were both scientists and spiritual guides. And while they lived in a world without X-rays or lab tests, they built a tradition that was effective, compassionate, and deeply connected to the rhythms of nature and the divine. The spiritual and physical sides of healing in ancient Egypt were never separate. Every treatment was both a remedy and a ritual. Every illness was both a physical problem and a spiritual disturbance. This belief shaped the entire medical system. When a patient was treated for pain, the doctor might apply a herbal salve, but he would also recite words of power. These incantations were not random, they were part of formal training. Each word, each gesture, was thought to carry energy and meaning that could influence the body and the forces causing the illness. Magic and medicine were partners, not opposites. The gods played a central role in healing. Different deities were called upon for different illnesses or parts of the body. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, was feared and revered as the bringer of plagues, but also their cure. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, was believed to have invented medicine and writing. Isis, the mother goddess, was called upon during childbirth and for protection in sickness. Doctors often wore charms or carried amulets carved with sacred symbols. These items were believed to shield the doctor and the patient from harmful forces. Certain stones and metals were chosen not for their chemistry, but for their spiritual power. Incense was burned during treatments, not only for aroma but for purification. Myrrh and frankincense were common, as were sacred resins collected from trees. The smoke was thought to carry prayers upward and drive out evil. These practices may sound mystical, but many had real effects. Burning incense reduced airborne bacteria. Chanting and ritual reduced stress and anxiety. The patient felt seen, safe, and part of a greater healing process. Ancient Egyptian healing was holistic. Every part of the patient mattered. Their body, their emotions, their family, their relationship to the gods. Temples played an important role in this process. The Temple of Kam-Ombo, for example, had chambers dedicated to medicine. Relief carvings on its walls show surgical tools, medicinal plants, and doctors at work. Patients came to the temple not just to pray, but to heal. These were centers of learning as well. The House of Life, the Per Ankh, was often attached to temple complexes. It was in these sacred places that knowledge was preserved, copied, and passed down. Medical knowledge was never seen as ordinary. It was sacred. Doctors were servants of the gods. They were guardians of divine knowledge. And they took this duty seriously. They wrote down what they saw. They studied what had been written before. They tested and adapted treatments. And they trained others to do the same. This cycle of learning kept Egyptian medicine alive for over 2,000 years. It evolved slowly, but it stayed strong, because it was built on respect for life, order, and wisdom. In some ways, their system was ahead of its time. They practiced triage, deciding which cases could be treated and which could not. They understood the importance of hygiene and sanitation. They tracked symptoms and connected them to outcomes. They developed hundreds of treatments that we now know are effective. They even recognized the need for emotional support. Healing was not just about the body. It was about comfort, connection, belief. In many cases, the belief that one could heal was itself a powerful medicine. And that is something we still understand today. By the end of the New Kingdom period, Egyptian medicine had developed into a system that was both structured and deeply spiritual. Doctors followed protocols. They learned from established texts. They applied their treatments carefully and respectfully. And still, they believed that true healing came from restoring balance within the person and with the divine. So what exactly did they treat? Almost everything. There were remedies for fevers, stomach pain, parasites, skin diseases, burns, toothaches, fractures, dislocations, eye infections, infertility, and more. There were even treatments for mental disturbances, what we might now call anxiety, depression, or hallucinations. Their understanding of the human body was partial but not primitive. It was rooted in what they could observe and what they believed to be true. And often, those beliefs guided them toward practices that actually worked. For example, they used willow bark to treat pain and fever, just like aspirin does today. They used moldy bread on wounds, which we now know can contain penicillin-like compounds. They treated eye infections with copper salts, which have antimicrobial properties. They were careful with dosage too. Many papyri describe the exact amount of an herb or ingredient to be used, the number of days the treatment should last, and the way it should be prepared. Some treatments were unusual. A remedy for baldness might include a mixture of crocodile fat and hippopotamus marrow. But alongside these strange recipes were remedies that modern science now confirms were surprisingly effective. They also understood the importance of mental and emotional health. Dreams were recorded and interpreted. Nightmares were taken seriously as signs of spiritual disturbance. Emotional suffering was acknowledged, not ignored. Their system may not have had hospitals in the modern sense, but they had healing centers, temples, homes of respected doctors, and mobile healers who traveled with tools and knowledge. Healing was not limited to the rich. While the elite had access to temple doctors and written papyri, villagers could still receive care from local healers, midwives, or priests trained in folk remedies. The accessibility of medicine reflected one of Egypt's greatest values: ma'at, harmony, balance, fairness. Health was seen as part of that universal order, and all people had the right to seek it. The legacy of Egyptian medicine did not disappear with time. Greek and Roman doctors studied Egyptian texts. Galen, the great Roman physician, borrowed heavily from Egyptian methods. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, Egyptian texts were translated and preserved in Arabic libraries. Even in the Renaissance, European scholars rediscovered Egyptian ideas and herbs through those preserved translations. Modern archaeologists and scientists continue to learn from mummies, tomb inscriptions, and papyrus fragments. Each discovery deepens our understanding of how ancient Egyptians lived, healed, and thought about the body. CT scans of mummies show healed fractures, surgical interventions, and even signs of heart disease. We find dental fillings, amputations, and evidence of treatments once thought impossible for the time. This is not myth. It is medicine. Ancient Egypt was not only a land of pyramids and pharaohs, it was a cradle of science, observation, and healing. Their physicians were among the first to keep case records. Their schools were among the first to organize medical knowledge. Their treatments, rooted in nature and belief, often worked better than we imagine. And though they lacked the tools of modern medicine, they possessed something equally powerful: a deep respect for life, a desire to understand the body, and a belief that healing was sacred. So when we talk about the foundations of medicine, we must remember the Nile, the temples, the papyri, and the quiet wisdom of those early healers. They looked at the human body with reverence. They treated it with care. And they left behind a legacy that, even thousands of years later, continues to inspire. In ancient Egypt, medicine and religion were not separate fields. They were one and the same. Healing was never just a physical act. It was a spiritual mission. To understand ancient Egyptian medicine fully, we must look beyond the tools and remedies and into the sacred rituals and divine beliefs that shaped every diagnosis, every cure, and every breath of hope. At the heart of this worldview stood the gods. Dozens of deities were associated with health, sickness, protection, and healing. Their presence was everywhere, from amulets worn around the neck to inscriptions carved into medical scrolls. The gods weren't just worshipped in temples. They were invoked at the patient's bedside, called upon with each whispered prayer and recited spell. One of the most powerful healing deities was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess. Known as both a bringer of disease and its destroyer, she represented the dual nature of health, destruction, and renewal. Priests and doctors would appeal to Sekhmet during outbreaks of plague or fever. Her wrath was feared, but her mercy was sought. Healing her anger was sometimes the first step in healing the body. Isis, the mother goddess, was also central to medical rituals. She was the protector of mothers and children, a symbol of nurturing and magic. Women in childbirth often wore charms blessed in her name. Her myth, where she resurrects her husband Osiris using magical words and divine herbs, was one of the earliest stories connecting life, death, and healing. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, was the patron of doctors and scribes. He was believed to have authored the very first books of medicine, divine knowledge handed down to humanity. Every doctor trained in a Per Ankh or House of Life would study under Thoth's protection. Their scrolls, their diagnosis, and even their handwriting were sacred. Another important figure was Heka, the personification of magic itself. In Egypt, magic wasn't fantasy. It was a force that flowed through the universe as real as the Nile or the wind. Heka wasn't just used in healing, it was healing. The very act of combining words, gestures, herbs, and prayers was seen as channeling Heka. Every spell, every ritual, was a way to tap into this universal power. And these rituals were not limited to temples. They happened in homes, in fields, at riverbanks, wherever the sick needed comfort. A mother might whisper a spell into a cup of herbal tea. A healer might bury an offering under a patient's bed. A priest might chant for hours beside a feverish child. Healing was a community effort, guided by faith and tradition. Magical texts were as detailed and complex as the medical papyri. The Book of the Dead included spells for the afterlife, but also for protection during life. Other texts, like the Book of Heka, contained powerful incantations to ward off disease, snake bites, nightmares, or demonic possession. These incantations weren't vague. They were specific. They included names of demons, body parts affected, and the symptoms to be healed. They were often written in red ink, a color associated with power, and recited in particular tones or rhythms to increase their effectiveness. Egyptians believed words had power. To speak a spell aloud was to bring it to life. Silence could be deadly, language a cure. Healing was not just something you did, it was something you said, something you believed. In ancient Egypt, the temple was more than a place of worship. It was a center of healing. These massive stone complexes, filled with incense smoke and carved hieroglyphs, were also where the sick and suffering went for treatment, comfort, and spiritual cleansing. The Temple of Kamambo is one of the most famous examples. Located near the Nile in Upper Egypt, it was dedicated to two gods: Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of fertility and surgery, and Horus the Elder, the falcon-headed god of protection and health. The temple's walls are adorned with detailed carvings of medical instruments: scalpels, forceps, scissors, medicine bottles, etched with care and precision. These are some of the earliest visual records of surgical tools in human history. Temples like Kamambo often had special rooms designated for healing rituals. These sanctuaries were quiet, clean, and isolated from the rest of the temple. The lighting was soft, often just candlelight. Priests and priestesses would perform purification rituals, anoint the sick with oils, and recite prayers. The environment was designed to soothe the soul as much as the body. Many of these temples contained sacred lakes or pools, believed to be blessed by the gods. Patients would bathe in these waters as a form of ritual cleansing before undergoing any form of medical treatment. Water, to the Egyptians, was not only cleansing, it was sacred. It was tied to birth, life, death, and rebirth. The House of Life, Per Ankh, often located within temple grounds, functioned like a university, clinic, and library all in one. It was where medical papyri were stored, copied, and studied. It was where doctors were trained, not just in practical treatments, but in sacred ritual, diagnosis, and healing incantations. Every act in the healing process, touching the patient, preparing a poultice, burning incense, was performed with intention and prayer. The gods were always present, watching over the sick, guiding the hands of the healers. Patients in need of divine intervention would often sleep within the temple. This was known as incubation. The belief was that during the night, the gods would visit the patient in their dreams and reveal the cause or cure for their illness. The priest-doctors would then interpret the dream, prescribe a treatment, and perform rituals based on the message received. This practice shows how deeply psychological healing was integrated into Egyptian medicine. The belief in divine dreams gave patients hope, a sense of purpose, and a personal connection to the divine. Today we understand the powerful link between mental peace and physical recovery, and the Egyptians understood this too long before science could measure it. Temples also housed statues of gods believed to hold special healing power. People would touch the statues, leave offerings, or whisper their ailments into the ears of the stone figures. In some cases, priests claimed to act as mediums for the gods, delivering healing words or prophecies directly to the patient. Everything was symbolic. Everything had meaning. A treatment was never just physical. It was a ritual to realign the body, the soul, and the cosmos. Whether or not the patient was cured, they left feeling seen, heard, and spiritually supported. This holistic approach gave Egyptian healing its remarkable longevity, lasting not just for generations but for millennia. Spells, incantations, and magical words of power. To the ancient Egyptians, words were not just communication, they were magic. Spoken words had power. Power to heal, power to harm, power to protect. This belief was so central that no medical treatment was complete without it. In many healing practices, the first step wasn't applying a poultice or offering a potion. It was reciting a spell. The healer would stand over the patient and speak a carefully memorized incantation. These words were chosen for their strength, rhythm, and sacred origin. They were believed to come from the gods themselves. Egyptian healing spells often began with a declaration of authority. The healer might say, "I am Thoth, Lord of Words," or "I speak with the power of Heka." This wasn't arrogance, it was invocation. By claiming the name of a god, the healer called upon divine power to enter the moment. It was both psychological and symbolic, a performance meant to reassure the patient and align the ritual with cosmic forces. Next came the naming of the illness. Egyptians believed that to name something gave you power over it. If a healer could name the demon or force causing the illness, they could control or banish it. This is why many spells included long lists of symptoms, body parts, and mythological references. For example, a spell for headaches might say, "Depart from this man, O pain that comes like the sting of Set. Depart, O flame that rises like the heat of Ari. Be cooled by the breath of Isis. Be soothed by the waters of Nun." Each line was rich with meaning. Set was a god of chaos. Referencing him identified the pain as disorder. Ra was the sun, its heat symbolic of inflammation. Isis, the healer, her name invoked comfort and mercy. Nun, the primordial waters, represented cooling and restoration. These were not empty phrases. They were poetry, theology, medicine, and psychology wrapped into one. Some spells were whispered. Others were shouted. Some were sung or chanted rhythmically like a song. The rhythm was believed to enhance the spell's power. Repetition could wear down evil forces or vibrate healing energy into the body. Incantations were often written on papyri and kept in the healer's kit. Some were also written on amulets or carved into stone charms worn around the patient's neck or wrist. In critical cases, the healer might write the spell on linen and wrap it around the wound, or even dissolve the ink in water and have the patient drink it. This blending of written and spoken magic was unique. It meant that healing was portable. The power of the spell didn't end when the healer left. It could be carried in a scroll, worn on the body, or kept beside the bed. Magical words were also passed down through generations. Many healing incantations were copied repeatedly, preserved in temple libraries and protected by scribes. Some were considered too powerful to be spoken by just anyone. Only priests or trained doctors were allowed to use them. One of the most famous healing spells comes from the story of Isis and Horus. When the child god Horus was stung by a scorpion, Isis used her magic to heal him. Her words were recorded and became a standard healing spell for bites and poisons. Part of it reads, "I am Isis, mother of Horus. I cast out the poison. Fall, poison, fall. Go down, venom, into the earth. Ra commands it. Thoth seals it. The sky listens. The earth obeys." To a modern listener, this may sound poetic or mythic. But to the ancient Egyptians, it was medicine, just as real as herbs or ointments. These incantations also served another purpose. They brought comfort. Hearing sacred words spoken with confidence gave patients a sense of hope. It reminded them they were not alone. They were part of a divine order watched over by powerful gods. And in many cases, belief itself was healing. Amulets, talismans, and symbols of healing. In ancient Egypt, healing was as much about what you wore as what you drank or swallowed. Amulets and talismans played a central role in protecting the body and restoring health. These small objects, made of stone, metal, wood, or clay, were more than decorative. They were charged with spiritual power, worn not for beauty but for survival. The Egyptians believed that illness could come from many sources: angry gods, wandering spirits, curses, or imbalance in the soul. Amulets acted as shields, guarding the wearer from unseen dangers and drawing in protective forces. One of the most powerful symbols of healing was the Eye of Horus, also called the Wedjat. This stylized eye represented restoration, protection, and good health. According to myth, Horus lost his eye during a battle with Set, the god of chaos. The eye was magically restored by Thoth, making it a symbol of healing and renewal. Doctors would wear the Eye of Horus as a pendant or carve it onto healing tools. Patients would wear it during illness or surgery. Some amulets were even placed inside wounds, beneath bandages, to watch over the injury as it healed. Another common healing charm was the Ankh, the looped cross symbolizing life. It was often held by gods in temple carvings, pressed against the lips of pharaohs in rituals, or drawn on medical scrolls. Wearing an ankh meant affirming the power of life over sickness and death. Scarab beetles were also worn as symbols of rebirth and transformation. Associated with the god Khepri, who rolled the sun across the sky each day, scarabs were thought to help the body roll back from disease toward health. Some scarabs were inscribed with healing prayers and placed on the chest or abdomen of the sick. The Jed pillar, representing stability, was another potent talisman. It was linked to the god Osiris and often worn during times of weakness or physical collapse. It was believed to prop up the body's strength, physically and spiritually. Amulets were not limited to jewelry. They were also baked into bread, soaked into drinks, or sewn into clothing. Midwives would tie protective charms around a woman's wrist during childbirth. Farmers might bury a healing talisman in their field to keep illness from their livestock. Certain materials were believed to enhance the power of the amulet. Carnelian was thought to bring vitality, lapis lazuli to offer wisdom, and turquoise to promote peace and well-being. Gold was linked to the sun and eternity, silver to the moon and healing. The process of making an amulet was itself a ritual. It involved chanting spells, purifying the materials, and dedicating the object to a specific deity. A healer might say, I empower this amulet in the name of Sekhmet. Let it guard the flesh. Let it soothe the wound. Let it drive away the demon of sickness. Children were especially protected with amulets. Tiny charms were tied around their necks or ankles to keep away fever and nightmares. Some were shaped like animals: cats for protection, frogs for fertility, or snakes to absorb poison. Amulets were also placed with the dead, to guard them in the afterlife. But their first purpose was in life, keeping people safe, strong, and whole. These talismans were reminders that healing was not just a matter of the body, it was a matter of energy, intention, and faith. To wear a symbol of health was to walk with confidence, to believe that the gods were watching, and that protection was never far away. In our modern world, we may call these items superstitions or ritual objects. But in ancient Egypt, they were medicine. Medicine worn close to the skin, whispering quiet prayers into every heartbeat. Healing through ritual, ceremonies, offerings, and divine intervention. While modern medicine relies on pills, procedures, and machines, ancient Egyptian healing often depended on something less tangible but equally powerful: ritual. In Egypt, healing wasn't just a personal process. It was a sacred event. And rituals played a central role in returning the body and spirit to balance. Rituals varied depending on the illness, the season, the social status of the patient, and even the god being invoked. Some were private, performed quietly at a bedside. Others were public, conducted by priest healers in temple courtyards with drums, incense, and chanting. One of the most common rituals involved burning incense and reciting hymns. The smoke was believed to carry prayers to the gods while purifying the space around the patient. Incense like frankincense, myrrh, and kifi, a special Egyptian blend, weren't just fragrant. They had antibacterial properties as well, though the ancients didn't know it in scientific terms. A typical healing ritual might look like this. A patient lies on a mat, surrounded by family. A priest enters, holding a bowl of water from the sacred lake. He sprinkles the water around the room, saying, "Begone, illness of the bones. Be washed away, fever of the flesh." A scribe stands nearby, reading aloud a spell written on linen, which is then tied around the patient's wrist. Offerings of bread, beer, and onions are placed on an altar. Gifts to Sekhmet, goddess of medicine. A candle is lit. A chant begins. The room fills with warmth, light, and purpose. This wasn't just performance. It was sacred action. Each step was designed to realign the invisible forces of life, death, sickness, and recovery. Some rituals were meant to transfer the illness out of the body. A common practice involved creating a clay or wax figure representing the disease. The healer would spit on it, smash it, or bury it, saying, "As I destroy this image, so I destroy the illness in this body." Another ritual involved whispering the patient's name into a bowl of oil and tossing it into the Nile. The flowing water carried the sickness away symbolically and hopefully physically. Offerings played a crucial role. Not just food, but also small statues, scarabs, scrolls, or even locks of hair. These were given to the gods in exchange for protection. Sometimes entire animals were sacrificed: a bull for Apis, a bird for Horus. The goal was always the same: restore harmony, remove the threat, and honor the divine forces of healing. For more serious or mysterious ailments, oracle rituals were used. A patient might ask a question aloud: "Why do I suffer from these pains?" And a priest, believed to be possessed by a god, would answer with a diagnosis or a cure. These answers were taken seriously, often dictating the next steps in treatment. In some cases, ritual reenactments of mythological stories were performed. For example, if a patient suffered from a wound that would not heal, the healer might reenact the myth of Horus being healed by Isis. The act of reliving the myth was believed to draw down the same healing power that worked in the story. Time, too, played a role in ritual healing. Certain days were considered unlucky for treatment. Others were ideal for certain kinds of healing. Ancient Egyptian calendars included not just the lunar cycles and seasonal changes, but also medical wisdom tied to the gods' moods and cosmic balance. Ultimately, Egyptian ritual healing was about participation. The patient wasn't passive. They were part of the process, making offerings, praying, wearing talismans, listening to spells, and believing in the outcome. The family was involved too. Healing was a collective act. Everyone present played a role, even if it was just to witness and support. Today we might call this the power of community, of ritual, of belief. But in ancient Egypt, it was simply called medicine. A medicine where every word mattered, every movement held meaning, and every illness was a chance to reconnect with the divine. The Lost Secrets of Ancient Egyptian Medicine. Part 3. Herbal Remedies and Natural Cures. Nature as Pharmacy. The Egyptian Herbal Tradition ***. In ancient Egypt, nature was not merely admired, it was studied, collected, categorized, and transformed into medicine. Along the banks of the Nile, herbs, roots, barks, flowers, and minerals formed the ingredients of a vast pharmacopoeia that rivaled anything seen in the ancient world. To the Egyptians, illness was not just a spiritual imbalance, it was also something that could be treated directly using the gifts of the earth. Herbal medicine wasn't a side practice, it was central to Egyptian healing. Temples had gardens where medicinal plants were grown under the care of priest healers. Markets sold not only food but bundles of dried herbs and mixtures in clay jars labeled with carved hieroglyphics. These remedies were used for everything from infections and burns to constipation, insomnia, and childbirth. Many of the plants Egyptians used still appear in modern herbal medicine. Take garlic. They crushed it, soaked it in vinegar, and used it to treat infections and even boost strength, a practice adopted by Greek and Roman physicians later on. Or aloe vera, applied to burns and skin rashes, still a staple in home medicine cabinets today. Honey was perhaps the most widely used substance in Egyptian medicine. Used both as a sweetener and a preservative, it was also prized for its antibacterial properties. The Egyptians used it in wound dressings, throat lozenges, and eye treatments. Honey was often mixed with other herbs to enhance their effectiveness, acting as a kind of natural antibiotic and carrier. Common herbal remedies and their uses ***. Let's take a closer look at some of the most common herbs and natural substances used by Egyptian healers, and what modern science has since learned about them. Myrrh. Sourced from the resin of a desert shrub, myrrh was burned in rituals but also used to treat infections. Its antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties are well documented today. Frankincense. Burned to purify the air, it was also inhaled to treat respiratory issues and was thought to calm the spirit. Castor oil. Used as a laxative. The Kahan Papyrus specifically recommends it for digestive problems. Juniper berries. Crushed and added to drinks to treat urinary tract infections. Coriander and cumin. Used in cooking but also prescribed for bloating and digestive complaints. Willow bark. Used for pain relief. This bark contains salicin, the chemical precursor to aspirin. Pomegranate. Both the juice and peel were used in formulas to combat intestinal parasites. Fenugreek. Recommended for respiratory disorders and used to help increase milk production in nursing mothers. Mandrake. A mysterious and powerful root believed to have sedative properties. It was used in fertility treatments and sometimes to relieve pain. Remedies were rarely used in isolation. Egyptian medical texts often describe complex recipes, blending multiple herbs with animal fats, minerals, and wine or milk. These mixtures were applied externally as pastes or ointments, taken orally or used as enemas. Papyrus prescriptions. Textual evidence of herbal knowledge ***. Much of what we know about Egyptian herbalism comes from their surviving medical texts. The Ebers Papyrus, for example, contains over 700 prescriptions and details how to prepare and use countless herbal mixtures. One treatment for asthma involved burning a mixture of herbs and inhaling the smoke, an early form of aromatherapy or steam inhalation. The Hearst Papyrus, another valuable document, outlines the treatment of urinary and digestive issues. The text describes the use of herbs to cool the belly, cleanse the bowels, and reduce fevers. These texts followed a consistent format. Name of the ailment, description of symptoms, recipe for treatment, method of application, sometimes a ritual incantation. These scrolls weren't just medical instructions, they were part prayer, part poem, and part pharmacology. midwifery, fertility, and women's herbal health ***. Egyptian women had access to a wide range of herbal remedies specifically for reproductive health. Midwives and female physicians would prescribe potions and pessaries for fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, and menstrual disorders. One remedy for contraception involved acacia gum mixed with dates and honey, formed into a paste and applied as a pessary. Modern studies have shown that acacia has spermicidal properties, which means these ancient formulas were not entirely based on myth. For easing childbirth, herbs like fenugreek, juniper, and mint were used in teas and infusions. Pain-relieving poultices were also applied to the lower back or abdomen. Women often wore protective amulets shaped like Bes, the dwarf god of childbirth, or invoked Isis, the divine mother. Menstrual disorders were treated with mixtures that included figs, onions, and beer. Remedies were customized according to the woman's symptoms, age, and spiritual needs. Holistic harmony, nature, spirit, and healing energy. The Egyptians saw plants as sacred, not just tools for healing, but as living beings infused with spiritual essence. Harvesting herbs was done with ceremony. The healer might offer a prayer or leave an offering before cutting the plant. Timing was crucial too. Some herbs were picked at sunrise, others at specific moon phases. This practice was based on the belief that all life was interconnected. Plants, gods, people, and illnesses were part of the same cosmic network. To use a plant for healing was to tap into a deeper order of the universe. Many Egyptian remedies aim not just to remove disease, but to restore balance and flow within the body's systems. Aromatherapy, massage oils, and herbal baths were common forms of treatment. Healing was a sensory experience. Touch, smell, sight, and sound all played a role. This blend of practical and spiritual medicine is what made Egyptian herbal healing so powerful. And it's why so many of their traditions echo in modern wellness practices today, from essential oils and teas to holistic therapies and mind-body medicine, surgery, dentistry, and trauma care. Cutting through time. The beginnings of ancient Egyptian surgery ***. When we think of surgery today, we imagine sterile rooms, anesthesia, and high-tech tools. But thousands of years ago, in ancient Egypt, physicians were already practicing surgical techniques with a precision and bravery that still astonishes modern historians. Without modern tools or antibiotics, these early surgeons used bronze scalpels, obsidian blades, linen bandages, and natural antiseptics to treat wounds, set bones, and even operate on the skull. The foundation of Egyptian surgical knowledge came from direct observation, particularly from injuries sustained in battle or labor. Soldiers and workers returned with fractures, lacerations, burns, and bruises. These real-world traumas served as textbooks for the ancient Egyptian physician, or swnw, who would study the wound, treat it, and record the method used. What's more incredible is that this wasn't just guesswork. Physicians followed a methodical diagnostic approach. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, an extraordinary medical scroll from around 1600 BCE, describes 48 cases of trauma, including head injuries, spinal wounds, and broken bones. It outlines not only symptoms and treatments, but also prognosis, acknowledging what could and could not be treated. A typical entry might read, "Examination of a man with a deep wound to the temple. If he speaks normally and does not vomit, it is an ailment I will treat." This level of clinical reasoning shows a startlingly modern approach. Observe, diagnose, treat if possible, and refrain if the case is hopeless. The tools of the ancient surgeon. Despite the lack of iron or steel, Egyptian surgeons had a surprising array of instruments at their disposal. Bronze scalpels and blades, sharp, sterilized in fire or alcohol like wine. Obsidian knives, volcanic glass sharper than modern surgical steel. Hooks and forceps, for probing and extracting foreign objects. Needles and thread, for stitching wounds with linen fibers. Spoons and scoops, used to clean wounds or apply ointments. Bone saws. Evidence suggests limited trepanation, drilling into the skull, may have occurred. These tools were stored in leather satchels and clay containers, sometimes buried with physicians as part of their burial goods. Archaeologists have uncovered surgical kits complete with tools, bandages, and ointments. Sterilization was not understood in the modern sense, but tools were often heated, and wounds cleaned with honey, resin, or beer, all possessing antibacterial properties. Dressings were made from linen soaked in oil or salt water, and splints crafted from wood, papyrus, or reeds. Battlefield medicine and trauma response ***. Warfare was frequent in ancient Egypt, and many advances in trauma care stemmed from military necessity. Soldiers suffered from arrow wounds, spear injuries, fractures, dislocations, and blunt force trauma. Doctors traveled with armies or were stationed at military outposts to treat these injuries quickly. The Edwin Smith Papyrus again provides a detailed account of battlefield trauma. It classifies injuries into 3 categories. An ailment I will treat, the case is manageable. An ailment I will contend with, the case is uncertain. An ailment not to be treated, the wound is fatal or beyond help. This triage system helped doctors prioritize resources, a practice still used today in emergency medicine. Examples include resetting dislocated shoulders with traction techniques, using linen bandages soaked in honey to cover large wounds, applying compresses of crushed herbs for bruising and swelling. Even splints were sophisticated. Fractured limbs were stabilized using bark, reeds, and papyrus, wrapped tightly with linen strips to ensure immobility. Archaeological scans of mummies show signs of healed fractures, suggesting successful treatments. Dentistry, more than just a smile ***. Ancient Egyptians had notoriously poor dental health due to their diet, which included gritty bread made from stone-ground flour. Sand and stone fragments wore down teeth, causing cavities, infections, and abscesses. Yet they were among the first civilizations to recognize dentistry as a specialized medical field. Titles like swnw ipit, Doctor of the Teeth, appear in inscriptions, and dental procedures were common. Evidence of their dental practices includes tooth extractions, likely done without anesthesia, using forceps or levers. Draining abscesses, using incisions and herbal poultices. Filling cavities, a mixture of resin, honey, and ground herbs may have been used to pack decayed areas. One mummy from Thebes shows a crude dental bridge, with a human tooth tied to adjacent ones using gold wire, perhaps the world's first known dental prosthetic. They also practiced preventative dental care, using herbal rinses made from mint, myrrh, and salt, along with chew sticks to clean teeth, an early form of the toothbrush. Internal surgery and gynecological procedures ***. Though limited by the taboo on dissection, some internal procedures were performed, particularly in gynecology and urology. The Kahan Gynecological Papyrus describes treatments for vaginal discharge, prolapse, and complications during childbirth. Procedures included pessaries, herbal inserts made from acacia, honey, and dates. Catheterization, thin reeds used to relieve urinary blockages. Uterine massage, to reposition a displaced uterus. Incisions, for draining cysts or abscesses. Childbirth was dangerous, and many midwives were trained to handle complications. Surgical interventions were rare but not unknown. Some relief methods, like cutting the perineum to assist in delivery, resemble the modern episiotomy. Women were often aided by both midwives and gods. Isis, Hathor, and Tauret were invoked during childbirth, and protective amulets were worn to ensure safety. Pain management and anesthesia ***. Anesthesia in ancient Egypt was rudimentary, but they made efforts to reduce suffering. Herbal sedatives and narcotics were used for pain relief before and after surgical procedures. Common analgesics included mandrake root, a powerful sedative and sleep inducer. Hemp, cannabis used for its calming effects. Poppy extract, opium possibly used to dull severe pain. Beer and wine, given in large quantities to dull consciousness. Massage and incantations were also used to soothe the patient. The emotional and spiritual comfort provided by ritual played a significant role in pain management. Wound care and infection control ***. Wound care was one of the most advanced areas of Egyptian surgery. Physicians cleaned wounds, removed dead tissue, and applied natural antiseptics. Typical wound care steps included washing the wound with beer or salt water, applying honey or resin to prevent infection, bandaging with sterilized linen strips, replacing dressings daily. They recognized signs of infection, redness, swelling, heat, and pus, and knew that timely intervention improved outcomes. Honey, in particular, was used extensively due to its antibacterial properties. Some wounds were treated with poultices made of crushed herbs like onion, garlic, frankincense, and coriander. When wounds did not heal, spiritual treatments were added to address underlying causes. Medical training and surgical ethics ***. Surgeons trained in the Per Ankh or House of Life, where they copied texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus and practiced on animals or cadavers when allowed. Teachers emphasized observation, ethics, and humility. Doctors were expected to treat only what they understood, keep records of their work, consult higher-ranking physicians when needed. The ethical guidelines often encouraged restraint. If a wound was too deep or if surgery would cause more harm than good, physicians were told not to proceed. The phrase "an ailment not to be treated" appears often in medical scrolls. This caution reflected their belief that healing was a balance between earthly knowledge and divine will. The legacy of Egyptian surgical practice ***. Many Egyptian techniques foreshadowed modern surgery. The use of antiseptics, diagnostic observation, surgical triage, and patient aftercare laid the groundwork for practices adopted in later civilizations. Greek and Roman doctors, including Hippocrates and Galen, studied Egyptian medicine. Surgical instruments found in ancient Rome closely resemble Egyptian models. Even today, the idea of careful observation before treatment echoes ancient Egyptian discipline. In many ways, they were pioneers, not only treating the sick but recording their efforts for the benefit of future generations. Their contributions endure in the principles of surgery, ethics, and patient-centered care. A civilization of healing hands. Ancient Egyptian surgeons were not miracle workers. They were skilled, cautious, and pragmatic. With limited tools, they practiced medicine that was empirical, ethical, and deeply human. They cared for the injured, relieved suffering, and sought understanding through experience and written record. Their fusion of physical skill, spiritual insight, and scientific reasoning makes them stand out across the ages. The story of Egyptian surgery is not just about scalpels and sutures. It's about the eternal quest to heal the human body and spirit. The legacy of ancient Egyptian medicine in the modern world. From papyrus to practice, how ancient wisdom shaped the future. Ancient Egyptian medicine didn't vanish into the sands of time. Instead, it planted seeds that grew across continents and centuries. As the Egyptian civilization declined and newer empires rose, their medical texts, tools, and treatments traveled, whispered through generations, translated across languages, and folded into new systems of healing. When we speak of Hippocrates and Galen, we often forget the shoulders they stood on. Egyptian medical practices, especially their empirical observation, herbal knowledge, and structured documentation, laid much of the groundwork for what would become Greco-Roman medicine. The ancient Greeks, most notably Herodotus and Homer, spoke highly of Egyptian physicians. Herodotus wrote, "The practice of medicine is so specialized among them that each physician is a healer of one disease and no more." This deep specialization and disciplined structure impressed the Greeks, who borrowed and built upon it. Transmission through translation. The Alexandrian Bridge. The city of Alexandria became a key bridge between Egyptian and Greek knowledge. The Great Library of Alexandria, one of the most significant knowledge repositories in history, housed medical scrolls, including those from earlier Egyptian dynasties. Greek scholars such as Hippocrates and Galen were influenced by these works. The Hippocratic corpus reflects the dual focus on symptoms and treatment found in the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri. Greek medicine began incorporating Egyptian herbal practices and diagnostics, including pulse reading and diet-based treatments. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, Arab scholars translated these Greek texts, along with original Egyptian ones, into Arabic. The renowned physician Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, included remedies and methods that trace back to the Nile. Egyptian medical knowledge thus passed through Greek, Roman, and Islamic hands before influencing Renaissance and Enlightenment Europe. Herbal legacy, echoes and modern remedies. Today, the herbal wisdom of the Egyptians is not just a curiosity, it's alive in kitchens, pharmacies, and wellness centers around the world. Let's consider a few examples. Aloe vera, still used in skin creams and burn ointments, just as the Egyptians applied it for sunburn and rashes. Garlic, now recognized for its cardiovascular benefits, Egyptians used it to boost strength and fight infections. Honey, used in hospitals as a wound dressing, its antibacterial properties were known in ancient Egypt. Pomegranate, promoted today for antioxidant benefits, it was used to combat intestinal parasites. These aren't just coincidences. Modern pharmacology continues to research ancient remedies, validating and refining what the Egyptians already practiced millennia ago. Universities and pharmaceutical companies now study papyrus-era recipes for potential bioactive compounds. Structure and specialization, a medical model ahead of its time. One of Egypt's most remarkable contributions to medicine was its structure. Doctors trained in formal schools like the Per Ankh followed ethical guidelines and specialized in fields such as ophthalmology, gynecology, or proctology, long before such divisions existed elsewhere. Today's hospitals mirror this system. Specialists, protocols, case documentation, and tiered hierarchies. Even triage, deciding which ailments could be treated, which were questionable, and which were beyond help, finds its origins in Egyptian logic as seen in the Edwin Smith Papyrus. Spiritual medicine and the rise of holistic health. The Egyptians believed in treating both the body and the soul, a concept now resurfacing in modern holistic and integrative medicine. Meditation, herbal therapies, energy healing, and the concept of mind-body connection have returned to the spotlight. Many alternative medicine practitioners today draw directly from ancient traditions, including Egyptian ones. Energy channels, metta, resemble Chinese meridians or Indian nadis. Rituals, once dismissed as superstition, are being re-evaluated for their psychological and emotional impact on healing. Even medical visualization techniques, imagining healing light or balance within the body, have echoes in Egyptian spiritual practice, where prayers, amulets, and divine invocations were common. Tools of the trade, modern instruments, ancient roots. Archaeologists have discovered surgical tools in Egyptian tombs, knives, forceps, scissors, and probes, not unlike those used today. Some were bronze, others made from sharpened obsidian or copper. Comparative analysis has revealed that some Egyptian surgical techniques, like stitching wounds with linen thread or using honey as a salve, remain effective and are still in use in certain parts of the world. Modern doctors may not chant incantations before surgery, but the basic principles of hygiene, precise incision, and dressing originated in places like the temple wards of Thebes or Saqqara. Preservation and rediscovery, mummies as medical time capsules. Modern medicine continues to learn from ancient Egypt. Literally, CT scans and X-rays of mummies have revealed conditions like arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, arthritis and joint degeneration, dental abscesses and treatments, tuberculosis and parasitic infections. Researchers use these preserved bodies to trace the evolution of diseases and to test hypotheses about ancient diets, lifestyles, and environmental exposure. Mummies, it turns out, are more than relics, they're medical case studies. Mysticism, myth, and medicine, reclaiming the balance. In a world increasingly driven by technology, there's a growing movement to rediscover and revalue ancient wisdom. Egyptian medicine's beauty lies in its balance. The integration of observation and intuition, herbalism and prayer, science and soul. While we may no longer believe in gods like Thoth or Sekhmet guiding healing hands, the principles they represented, wisdom, precision, compassion, still shape the best of medical care today. The temples may be ruins, the papyri faded, but the knowledge lives on, in the questions we ask, the remedies we test, and the care we give. Conclusion: the enduring legacy. Egyptian medicine was not primitive. It was organized, inquisitive, and often astonishingly accurate. Its influence can be seen in modern diagnostic methods, herbal pharmacology, medical ethics and specialization, holistic wellness approaches, and perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that healing is an art as much as a science. To walk in the footsteps of the swnw, the doctors of ancient Egypt, is to walk the same path that modern physicians still follow, one that seeks not just to treat, but to understand.